Welcome to Shop Chats. I'm Katherine Coble, and today I am joined with one of my colleagues, Wojtowicz, as well as our special guest, Terri Wada. She is the founder and CEO of a company called Collabo XD. And today we're going to have a little bit of a conversation about research and about gathering insights. We often have to do this to develop marketing plans and to do some brand development for clients. And Terri, you and I met a while back, and you were telling me a little bit about your approach to research and to gathering insights, and it felt a little different to me. Talk a little bit about this idea of gathering insights in a creative and participatory way. I think those were your words.
Yeah, definitely. Those are my words. So I guess from a research standpoint, we tend to think of surveys or focus groups. And oftentimes when we think of that, it's how do we get structured data, right? So that we can compare what people are saying across different people to the same question, right? So that helps us analyze the data because it's apples to apples. When we ask people to be more participatory and creative, you're not going to get apples to apples. You're going to get a fruit basket, right? Just all kinds of fruits. They're going to talk about all kinds of things. And so while it might not feel comparative, what's really interesting is you can start to understand when someone tells you about their entire story, then you can understand kind of the intricacies about that person, right? So rather than getting all apples to apples, we kind of want that fruit basket so we can see how the fruits are different. And it's in that differences that becomes really interesting. But the way to get there is we can't just ask people the same questions. We have to start to dig deeper and ask them to do, I guess, there's a different approach, and our framework for that is to look at what people say, do, and make. Mm-hmm. So saying is doing an interview, sending a survey. This is what people are going to tell us they say they do. We all probably know, because we probably do this ourselves, that we don't always do what we say we do. And so seeing what people do, doing observations or applied ethnography, that's where you get into the real settings and find out how do they actually operate, right? And then the last way that we look at kind of getting information is looking at what people make or create. Because, and this is based off of our core belief that all people are creative. And when we think of that, it's not like drawing or being an artist, right? Creativity is really our ability to create concepts, to create connections. And it's really a human ability, this idea of creativity. And so if we can accept that all people are creative, when we make something, we are using all of our brain to solve some kind of problem to make that thing. Mm-hmm. And so when we make something, there's so much information that you can learn about how someone understands the world, how someone understands a problem, and how they would fix that problem. Mm-hmm. And so that's why when we approach research, we want to understand those three things. And it's that making side that gets a little trickier and messier, and how do you gather that data? So from a method standpoint, it looks like sometimes we're just sitting alongside someone going through their experience with them. So we become a friend. We've done quite a bit of research in healthcare. And so our team members will be up there at 7 a.m. alongside those nurses or alongside those team members, and they're walking the same path as them throughout the entire day for their 12-hour shift, right? So in that aspect, they're getting their own understanding. Our team member is understanding that person's day from their perspective. And at the same time, they're building a relationship with that person to start to feel like a friend, that they can share any insights or any stories or any like unsaid, unspoken rules. They're able to share that in a confidential space with our team member. And so that just gets deeper to understanding someone's story. When we look at what people make, then it's about bringing different kinds of creative tools. So our research might look playful. Mm-hmm. So people come into our space and we've got crayons and we've got building blocks and we've got pipe cleaners and things you might find in a kindergarten classroom. And the reason why it works well is, we use these tools with kindergartners and ask them to make stuff, and they can make stuff. So if we have these tools that are really usable, why shouldn't we just use that with adults as well? They will understand how to use them. And it's interesting because then you start to see how someone's mind works when you ask them to, hey, if this is the problem, if we want to solve this problem, how would you solve that problem? Here's some building blocks. show me a picture, make a model for me. Yeah. And I think, we all kind of understand that notion of a picture's worth 1,000 words, right? Mm-hmm. So when you make us a model, all of that information's built into that model that they're building. And so that's where we want to get to in terms of that being participatory and in that creativity space.
Right, that's great. So Justin, it feels like that kind of research could really bring some different types of insights, especially into the why people do what they do. Have you seen any of this kind of research really play out with various clients that you've worked with in the past? And what do you think is the value there?
Yeah, I love that approach. It's a lot of fun. I haven't gone to the extent of actually asking someone to build something and make something, but I really do love that approach. I think it's fascinating, the more participatory and observing someone interacting with a brand or a product or a service and how they make decisions. I think that's how you can really get to the why. And when you think about a customer journey or a consumer journey, and as a brand trying to move them through that funnel, there's a lot of triggers that a brand has to address. And the research and the data gives us a lot of information about those triggers so a brand can address them in their messaging and their communications. And I feel like at the very bottom, call it like a hierarchy of those triggers, there's just the table stakes. So everything that the brand and all its competitors are doing is just expected to move on for a customer to move on to the next phase. It's just checking those boxes on those table stakes. And then a lot of times you have a brand that's talking about its features, what it does differently, how it can help a customer. Then to really get to the benefit portion of that pyramid, of that hierarchy, you need to do that type of research. You need to observe. You need to participate with them and see how the brand, the product, the service helps them solve problems, their day-to-day lives, and their decision-making to interact with that brand. And typically on the benefit side, you're gonna see, a functional benefit. Mm-hmm. I use this product, I use this service, it's convenient, it's saving me time, it's helping me in this way. But to really get to that emotional benefit, the feelings, and really connecting with an audience, with a customer based on emotion and feelings, that's a type of research that you really need to have. And an example of participating in research with the audience, with the brand. This is this is several years ago, working with a agency that really specialized in B2B building products. And our client, they manufactured steel studs for commercial buildings. So you think about, the drywall in a residential, it's wood studs. Well, they had steel studs behind it. And we did similar type of research where we would go out in the field with their sales reps and watch them and shadow them and just see how they're selling their products to their customers. And it was fascinating. And we captured a huge insight out of that really made a difference, and we were able to create a new product for them. And we were shadowing a sales rep, and he had this product where, think of like a framing system for a door made of steel and has two side pieces, and then you insert the top piece and it creates the frame. So he had samples of it, and he was literally just carrying it with them, or maybe it was in like a plastic bag or something, but didn't look all that professional. And then we're in the conference room of the customer he's trying to sell it to, and he's assembling it, and it's a nice wooden table, and these are sharp metal products, and he's putting them on the wooden table, and he's holding one, and he's using his elbow to support the other one, and trying to assemble it, and it was just clunky, and the risk of scratching this poor guy's nice wooden table, and so I can see my boss, his name was Tom Miller, and I can just see that that the wheels are turning, and we're watching like this can be such a better experience that we'd have not have understood without participating in this. And so we took that information and we went back to the agency and kind of downloaded the team, and we prototyped a whole new product where what if we just built a case and the product was enclosed in the case, it was already pre-assembled, the case had a handle, it was branded, it was really nice and professional, just sit it on the table, open it, no risk risk of the metal scratching the wood table. And the prototype we took to our client and we pitched it and they loved it. Like, what a great solution. And, they paid us to actually design a real model and, produce 50, 75 of these things for their sales team. And, having that insight of watching the actual experience led us to coming up with a new idea, a new product for our customer. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's great. That's a great example of understanding the experience, not only from the customer's perspective, but from the salesperson's perspective as well, and really coming up with a completely new solution you might not have otherwise thought of. Talk to us a little bit, Terri, about this idea of empathic research. You had used that term when we had talked before as well. And what kinds of things are you looking for when you're doing empathic research?
Yeah, that's a good question. So empathic research, what we're generally looking for, and this is based off of my personal perspective of what empathy is. Empathy is not really sharing emotions, because that's really more trying to sympathize, right? I want to feel the same emotion that you have, or I can sympathize because I know that you're sad and I know what sadness feels like, so I can understand that you might be sad, so I can feel sympathy for you. From my perspective, empathy is really understanding what someone's thinking and understanding how they're making those connections that lead to the feelings that they're having. And so empathy is always about just understanding. How do I understand more? How do I understand more about you? And as soon as we feel like we understand someone, then that's where our empathy stops. Because once I say, I understand you, I know what you're going through, then I'm no longer seeking understanding because I feel like I've got it. Right? Yeah. So when we do empathic research, it's always from that notion that we have to acknowledge that we can never understand someone to the depths of their being, right? Mm-hmm. And so continuous seeking of that understanding is what we're striving for, whether it's through an interview, trying to probe deeper and ask deeper, more open-ended questions, or probing or prompting questions, or if it's going into their context or having them take us into their space and tell us all the stories that exist, right? Or having folks bring things that are important to them and have them tell us, why is this important to you? And really being open to hearing and accepting of what folks are saying, right? Regardless of our own personal perspectives or worldviews, we have to acknowledge and accept that everyone, aside from my own individual self, has a different view of the world.
So to that point, it sounds like the methodology you're talking about is a little bit more complex than traditional qualitative research, focus groups, things like that. Mm-hmm. But do you feel like, are we getting more sophistication in that because customers are getting more complex, or our targets are getting more complex, or is it because of some other reason?
I think the world is getting more complex. I think because of the higher levels and faster connections that we have globally, right? That just makes the world more complex, which makes, when we have more connections, we have more access to information, we have more access to resources, we have more access to people, and all of those connections, it's like a network, right? The more connections within a network, the more complex that network is. And so with that, it becomes more and more difficult to understand all the workings of that network because there's so many connections at play. Right. So it's always hard to say, well, it's this one thing, that's why this is happening, right? Generally, something like with market trends, we might see market behaviors and see market trends. We want to say it's these three things that's causing that. Yeah. But from a market level, that may be true, but when you think of what our market's made of, it's made of people. Mm-hmm. And each and every one of those people inside of that market has their own value system, their own mindsets that they're using to make all of these decisions, micro decisions as well, that shapes the market, yeah. Right? And so if we can understand at that level, what is someone's value system and what is their mindset and what is kind of the context of the space that they're making their decisions in, then we can start to understand the complexity of that one person, right? But the great thing is that us as human beings, we tend to have very similar drivers. And there are differences within the ways that we operate, but how we make decisions usually stem back to our personal value systems and our mindset. So if we can understand that and account and understand, I guess, that those are always going to be different for different people.
So I'm curious, Justin, what your take is on how you can pair this kind of empathic research with more quantitative research, because in the marketing world, we're definitely trying to solve problems and create markets and pull together groups of people who are going to be interested in a product or a service and to deliver it to them in a way that they want and need and will connect with. How do you pull those two things together to get the most out of the research that you're doing?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. So I think this type of research, this deeper level of qualitative research, really gets, again, to the top of that pyramid: the emotion, the feelings, the emotional connections, how people make decisions. And in marketing and product development, we talk a lot about product market fit. And so that's almost like layering internal perspective with external perspective. So as brand builders, or as the leaders of a brand, we have ideas about what makes our product or service valuable. And we have ideas about the features and benefits that are going to connect with audiences. And those are important, but I'd call that like the internal perspective. When we do this type of research, we really get that external perspective. And it might be different. The things that you're talking about, what they value, what they connect to, how they think about things, how they make decisions, may or may not align with what the brand's original or the product's original thinking was. And so you start to overlap those things, and hopefully there is some point there where there's some overlap. And that's really where you start to make the product market fit. And that's really a sweet spot for taking that research, taking what makes that product differentiated or valuable, and it gives you a channel to really reach an audience in an impactful way. So I really think you need both. And I can't remember the original part of your question, but I was getting to it.
Just about pairing that quantitative with the qualitative.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that qualitative is so valuable because you understand, well, how does this make, how does my product, its featured services, make someone feel? How can we connect to them? I think sometimes that's enough on its own. I think sometimes you can find that product market fit with that qualitative research, and you can go from there and you can build campaigns, and you can build positioning, and you can build messaging. But if I was to pair it with quantitative, I might just use it to like statistically validate that those feelings are true across a larger audience sample size. So that's how I'd pair the two. But I don't think you necessarily need to, but I think if you want more statistical validation, then the quantitative could help with that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I want to switch gears just a little bit here. And we've been talking and focusing mostly on the insights and the research part of it. And once you have those great insights, Terri, I know that one of the things you've said that you and your team do is create experiences. Mm-hmm. So let's talk a little bit about that, because you even said earlier it's difficult to create a perfect experience that's always going to, be repetitive, right? Yes. But we can create a bit of a structure for the best, most optimal customer experience. So how do you do that, though? What does that look like?
Yeah, so that is a heavy question. I say it's a good question and it's heavy. So we operate in this world of experience design, and I think we like to, as designers, as service providers, as businesses, we like to think that we can create experiences, but in all actuality, we cannot create an experience, right? We can create the conditions to encourage someone to have a kind of experience that we would like them to have. So, for example, party planners, right? They want to put all the things into place to create maybe a theme and all the activities in there so that they can create a kind of feeling and experience for the people who attend that party, whether it's a wedding or bar mitzvah or, first birthday party. Like, those are all different kinds of experiences that we want to try to create. And it's always about creating the conditions for a specific kind of experience. And so when we think about that, there are so many, if we think of just our own experiences on an everyday basis, how we experience the world and how we experience maybe a service is made up of so many different interactions throughout that entire experience, right? So if we think of a party, there's the moment where you get the save the dates, to the point where you have the actual invite, and then how things get communicated between the invites to the day of the party, and then you've got the arrival, and then you've got all of the things going on during the party, and then even post-party, right? What happens after that? And so we want to put all of these different, we would call them touch points, right, in place, so that we can try to shape an experience that we want someone to have. The challenge there is we don't exactly know how anyone is making their decision at any given point in time, because how we make decisions is not consistent, right? Even just individually. We don't always make the same decision given the same conditions all the time, because we change, our values shift, our mindset shifts, the conditions are slightly different, right? And so while we want to put all the things in place and say, okay, we have all the touch points in place for the best experience, it always will change, right? So, and you see this, so you all are doing customer journey maps, right? Or doing customer journeys. Yeah. And if you just do it once, you know that that's just a snapshot, right? This is what that customer journey looks like today. And if we don't change the things that we put in place, the touch points we have in place, we can't expect that experience to be the same when the world around us and that customer is constantly changing, right? So if you looked at a coffee shop back in the 1980s, right? So if coffee shop experience in the 1980s was probably you go to a diner or a small restaurant, you get a cup of coffee, but then you look at coffee shops today, right? The experience is entirely different because the world around us has changed. The service still offers the same outcome, but the experience had to change in order to keep up with how people are just encountering everything else around them, from technology to what types of coffee they want. Now we know there's more than one type of coffee, you know? There's so many mix-ins that we can put in there.
And that's really how brands come into existence. In some respects, they're built on the actual experience way more than they are the actual product.
Absolutely.
So that's fascinating. Justin, what have you seen in terms of how experience has really anchored a brand? Have you seen that where the experience almost becomes more important than the product itself?
Yeah, that's another great question. I'm thinking about some research that we did to inform a campaign for a professional minor league baseball team, the Indianapolis Indians. And in our research, we talked to audience members who were fans. They would go to tons of games. And we talked to those who didn't go to games. And so we wanted to really explore and dive into, well, why aren't they attending games? I mean, it's a great experience. So what are they missing? What do they understand about the experience? And so the feedback we kept getting over and over again, or at least one piece of feedback, was that, well, the season's really long and all of a sudden it's just kind of over and we forgot to go, right? And we heard that over and over again, and that was like a trend, but we didn't get to the why. And so we wanted to get to the why to really understand, like, from an experience perspective, what are they missing? What don't they understand? And as we dug in, what we were hearing is that, well, when a concert comes to town, it comes, once a summer or once a year, or once every 2 years, or a festival comes to town, it's only here for the weekend. And so there's urgency. When we find out about these things, we circle our calendars and we're going to go to them. Versus a baseball game, the baseball season, there's 50, 60 games a season. It's from, May until September. It just lacks that urgency. There's no real reason to circle it on your calendar. So that the experience there was like FOMO, fear of missing out. And so we use that as our insight to come up with an idea, campaign strategy for this baseball team, and how can we take the Indianapolis Indians baseball experience and create some FOMO around it using that insight. And so there was a lot of experiences built into the baseball season that could be positioned as more urgent, as once in a season. They had craft beer nights where a local brewery would only have their beer in the ballpark that one night. That's urgency. You can create some FOMO around that if you're a big fan of that brewery. They had, Star Wars nights and Marvel nights and Disney princess nights. And so those fan bases, they have built-in fan base that can come experience Star Wars at the ballpark ballpark, or PJ Masks at the ballpark. So you could really create some urgency around that one event because it only happens one time, and create some FOMO around it. So, the research led us to the FOMO insight and really talking about the Indianapolis Indians experience differently to cater to different motivations to want to go.
That's great. So as we wrap up, Terri, I'm just curious if you have any suggestions if a brand is thinking about really uncovering those deeper insights and really understanding that why behind the customer, the employee experience, et cetera. What would be your recommendation on how to even get started with that?
First step would be to do kind of like a data audit. So what information do you have about your customers and your customer base? What information are you missing? And so from a research standpoint, we generally like to think of the qualitative and the quantitative. So do you have quantitative data? Because that's going to tell you what's happening, right? What's happening, to what extent. And to some level, you can understand a little bit of like what people might do, right? And so understanding that we've got some quantitative data, which is usually more, larger data sets, then you want to look at, do we have any qualitative data? So what do we have on the qualitative side that helps us understand deeper our customers, their behaviors, their value systems, and their mindsets? And also understanding that they're probably different groups of folks, right? So segments within that. And once you're there, then you can see. And most times when you step back, for most organizations, they've got a lot of quantitative data, and a lot of times they don't have the qualitative. So identify the gap first and see where your data gap is, because that's where you need to start. For us, we're always like super qualitative, and we've got a huge quantitative gap, right? And so that's why it's one, step back, take a look at data gaps, and then two, then figure out how you're going to gather the information that you need to gather. Because once you know it's missing, it's easier to take the next step of, now that I know that we don't have this, how do we get this? From the qualitative standpoint, if you are looking to understand your customers better and more deeply, and you really want to get to those value systems, ask them to tell their stories. So you want to ask folks to share their stories, because like I said earlier, a picture is worth 1,000 words, then a story's worth 1,000 lessons, because every single person's story is the manifestation of all the decisions they've made that created that story. And how we even process our own experiences with other people, we tell ourselves stories, right, about that person. And so when you ask someone to share their story with you, one, it makes them feel completely heard and seen, which is great for relationship building with your customers. And then two, you're gathering so much information around how they make decisions, what's valuable to them, what's important, and where their mind's at. And that's just deep information that you can't really get in any other way.
I love it. It's so in line with how we like to approach problem solving at Borshoff as well. So, well, Terri, thanks for joining us today. Justin, thank you for being with us as well.
Yeah.
This has been a great conversation. And if you're interested in learning more about some of the other subjects that we cover, check out our YouTube page. And also check out all of our social media platforms. Shop Chats is a monthly podcast that you can get on any podcast platform or on YouTube. And we just invite you to enjoy some of the other content that we have. Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it.